Hello. So this is yet another one of my vacation videos, meaning a video in which I overshare on personal information without bringing any actual value to the table. I love making these videos, and I do get the odd comment here and there by someone who says that they enjoy watching these videos. And so I assume that there are at least 5 or 6 people out there who actually want to watch this kind of content. And so that's a good enough reason for me to continue making them. However, with that said, don't worry, I have no intention to share every single vacation or personal trip that I go on with you, with this audience. And so if you are not into these types of videos, feel free to check back in next week for a more regular upload. Anyway, since our son was born in late 2024, traveling has been very different for my wife and I, meaning that while our son is a great travel companion for the most part, he is obviously sometimes a bit moody, and just the whole logistics side of things with strollers, diapers, and so on and so forth makes traveling a lot more, let's say, complex and less spontaneous. But we love to travel, and we want to continue to travel as a family too. But since time, money, and the patience of our son are very limited resources for us, we decided to go on more short trips this year. And so to kick things off, we have already been to Zealand for a short getaway at the end of 2025, and also visited Bern in Switzerland in January of 2026. And last week we hopped onto our first flight since our son was born to Stockholm in Sweden. And since we wanted to keep both our budget and the logistical headache that is airplane travel with a 1-year-old to the absolute minimum, we decided to swallow our pride and travel with Ryanair, and also with no added luggage whatsoever. Now, that kind of constraint inevitably led to the best and also worst question of every trip, and that is what to bring, and more importantly, what kind of camera gear to bring. First though, I had to choose which bag I would use for this trip, and this wasn't too hard considering that I definitely wanted to go for a backpack, and so therefore all of my messenger style bags were out of the picture already. And the only backpack that I had that fit the dimensions and criteria of an on-person item for Ryanair was the little backpack by Companion. Now, full transparency, I have a standing business relationship with Companion, and I've received the bigger brother of this little backpack for free, but I bought this little backpack that I used for this trip with my own money when it was on sale at 20% off at my favorite camera store. Now, I don't want to dwell on the gear section of this video for too long, so let's just quickly go through the camera gear that I brought for this trip. I brought the Leica M11P with my 28mm f1.5, the 35mm f1.4, the 50mm f1.4, and the 90mm f2 lenses, as well as my Sony ZV-E1 with the 20-200mm Sigma lens for filming, and the Canon V1 for quick on-the-go videos, and more importantly, as a camera to hand off to my wife for the occasional snapshot here and there. Plus, obviously, a bunch of batteries, cables, chargers, and so on. And so with all of that room being taken up by my camera gear, I had very little space for any actual personal items, and so I just brought a spare pair of underwear, a spare pair of socks, and a little thing of soap and shampoo and a toothbrush. That's kind of it. I might have snuck a spare t-shirt in with the bag that we had for our little baby boy. And yeah, also I brought my 13-inch MacBook Air along for the ride in my backpack as well. Oh yeah, and a little insulated Clean Canteen water bottle. So a fairly minimalistic packing setup for a 3-day trip overall, if you ignore the mountain of camera gear and tech. But was it worth it to bring this much camera gear on a trip of this type? Absolutely not, but more on that in a minute. First, let's talk about the trip itself. Our trip started at our local airport near Baden-Baden in southern Germany. It said on the website that we should be at the airport at least 3 hours before our flight takes off because of long waiting times with security, and being the good little obedient Germans that we are, we arrived at the airport exactly 3 hours before our flight left, only to breeze through the check-in and security within 15 minutes or so that we had almost 3 hours of time to kill at the gate with our 1-year-old. Good times, as you can imagine. After looking at planes for a while, a diaper change, and spending 2 eternities with Bob the Builder, we were finally allowed to board the plane. Not gonna lie, the flight itself dragged on a bit, and since it was a short flight and the flight attendants were selling snacks and beverages for at least half of it, the lights stayed on for the entire time, which meant that our son had no chance to sleep and just had to sort of sit still for the entire 2.5 hour long journey. Which also went well, as you can probably imagine. Seriously though, he did reasonably good, and it was a huge joy to watch him peek out of the window during takeoff and landing with wide eyes, taking in the sensation of flight for the very first time. When we arrived in Stockholm, we went straight to our hotel, which was surprisingly nice. Not outrageously luxurious, but I stay at a lot of hotels for work, and I have to say that most of the hotels that I stay in, even 4-star superior hotels, are kind of rundown dumpsters, it seems nowadays. And so yeah, it was a breath of fresh air to have a 3-star hotel that sort of just over-delivered. Modern, clean, nicely decorated, everything comfortable, and nothing to complain about whatsoever, with a decent view over the airport. And so yeah, we just took in the views and pretty much went straight to bed. The next day we woke up feeling surprisingly well rested and ready to explore Stockholm, and so we picked out at our complimentary breakfast, which, just like our room, was a lot better than we had expected. Then we checked out of the hotel and hopped onto a bus that brought us straight to the center of Stockholm. Alright then, we made it to Stockholm Central, and now it's time to go for a little wander. We have absolutely no idea what we want to see or what we want to do today. All we know is that we're excited to be here and that we don't have too much time. So we're probably going to find something to eat sooner or later, even though breakfast was absolutely delicious and also plentiful. So yeah, let's just see. Our little guy here is a little bit sleepy, but also just super cozy in his little snowsuit. It was a mostly overcast day with sub-0 degrees temperature and a bit of snow here and there. Objectively speaking, not bad at all, and could have made for some great photographic opportunities, but when you're traveling with family, photography really is just a bonus. Family always comes first, and since our little baby boy was sort of tied up in his stroller for most of the time and he really wanted to stretch his little legs, but it was just too cold, especially with the biting wind outside, even with his down snowsuit that we brought for him. We had to get into some cafe or store or whatever every now and again so that we could warm up and so that he could move around for a bit before we were ready to go out and explore again. Eventually, as the afternoon drew near, we decided to just check into our Airbnb, which we had booked for the night and which was situated right at the very center of Gamla Stan, which is sort of the old and super touristy part of town. The apartment, however, turned out to be, well, let's say, not a great fit for us. For the most part, that's on us though. In hindsight, it should have been completely obvious to us when booking that this apartment wouldn't work for us. So what was wrong with the apartment? Well, first of all, it was situated on the 4th floor and only accessible via a staircase in a very old house, again at the center of the old part of town. And so right out of the gate, that's not great when you have to carry a kid and a stroller and luggage. That's just not going to work. And also the top staircase was sort of part of the apartment, which meant that there was kind of a hole in the middle of the living room, which is not ideal if you are there with a 1-year-old. And to top it all off, I assume that we were the first guests there for at least a few days because the apartment was really cold when we arrived and the heater just wasn't powerful enough to really get the apartment all warm and cozy, which was a bit of an issue considering that outside it was around minus 12 degrees Celsius that evening. Again, overall then, the apartment was sort of just not a great fit for our needs on that particular trip. And so we actually contemplated just leaving the Airbnb and getting a hotel room instead. But in the end, we decided to stay and make the best out of the situation and to just head to a restaurant nearby to grab some dinner, which usually brightens our mood. And so we went out to a restaurant nearby called the Augustas Folksalong. Great restaurant, only a few items on the menu. Among them, your traditional Swedish meatballs, excellent quality and very cozy overall. Sadly though, Aaron, our baby boy, really didn't like the food at all. And so since he got hungry and kind of lost his temper, we had to leave in a hurry and go to the next 7-Eleven around the corner to grab some snacks for him as well. And so in the end, in between Aaron's temper tantrums, the apartment situation, and just being kind of exhausted from being out and about the entire day and the freezing cold and everything, we just decided to go to bed and wait for this day to be over. Now, I had made plans for the next day to go out on a little morning photo walk, and so when I woke up, that's exactly what I did. All right, and good morning. Welcome to Stockholm. I am in Gamla Stan right now, roaming around after perhaps the worst night of sleep in an Airbnb that is really nicely located right in the heart of Gamla Stan. If that's your vibe, not really ours, to be honest. Last time we were in Stockholm, we were in Lierholm, and yeah, we would prefer to go there again next time. But either way, beautifully situated. I do have the M11P with me, with the 50mm 1.4. So let's see what we can get. I ended up not getting a single photo that I was even remotely happy with. And so after just about half an hour or so, I kind of gave in and headed back to the Airbnb. Now, originally I had planned to go out for like 2 to 3 hours, maybe sit down at a local cafe and really just, get into the flow of things. But since I knew that my wife would be still at that cold Airbnb and fighting my son to not throw himself down those stairs, it just didn't feel right to be out and about and just do photography or whatever. And looking back at the few photos that I actually did get on that trip, I think going out in the early morning wasn't the right call anyway. I should have just gone out late in the evening in Gamla Stan because it's an old town. You got all of those lights and those narrow alleyways, and I think there was some potential there for better photos. But a bit of a wasted opportunity. Nothing I can do about that now. Anyway, we quickly packed up our things, checked out of the Airbnb, and went off. Luckily, it only took a few minutes for our boy to fall asleep, and so we took the chance to head to the next best cafe to warm ourselves back up again and enjoy some breakfast. And the cafe that we went to, which is called the Café Schweizer, was actually super lovely. Great food, cinnamon buns, good coffee, just what we needed at that time. And best of all, Aaron was asleep the entire time we were there. My wife and I are simple people, and so it really doesn't take more than an hour of peace and quiet, a warm place, and some good food for us to be happy again. And so after our breakfast, we really felt ready to make the best of the rest of the time we had left in Stockholm, which at that point was only a few hours. And so we made our way to the nearest train station and hopped onto a train to Liljeholm, which is the area that we stayed in the last time we were in Stockholm. And so we strolled around the area for a while, visited different places, had lunch at the Brödernas, which was lovely as usual, and just enjoyed our time there. Eventually, we took a bus back to the Stockholm airport and flew back to Baden-Baden, where we arrived with the signature Ryanair crash landing at around 10 p.m. So, in summary, it was a short trip. I got some okay-ish photos, but nothing I'm too happy with at all. We did get a lot of learning experience, though, both in terms of traveling with a small child and also in terms of what gear to bring for a trip of this type. First of all, in regards to traveling with a small child, just really quick, well, turns out cold places really aren't the ideal destinations for small children, especially when it comes to city trips. Small children, for the most part, like to move around a lot, and so that's really not going to happen when you're in a city in the freezing cold with lots of people around and cars going everywhere and frozen roads and sidewalks and such. And so, yeah, not ideal with our baby boy. The reason why we chose Stockholm, by the way, is because we've been there before. It's a really safe, secure, orderly city, so it kind of seemed like the right place to go for a first sort of city trip, a very non-scary city to visit with a small child. And that's probably still true, but not at this time of the year. Not with a small child. I mean, it still worked, kind of, but it certainly wasn't ideal. That aside, I learned that the next time I'm going to book a place for us to stay at, I'm not going to ignore the obvious red flags, which in this case, as I said earlier, like top of the 4th floor, only accessible via stairs, and very old apartment in an old part of town, and so on and so forth. Not really ideal when you're traveling with a small child, especially not in the winter. In my head, when I was booking the apartment, I was kind of like, yeah, but you know, it's really nicely situated, and so we'll just make it work. And yeah, that just really didn't work out. But anyway, let's talk about the more interesting stuff next, which is the camera gear that I had brought. Well, as you might have noticed, I had brought a lot of camera gear and I actually didn't use most of it. Now, longtime viewers will know that up until a year ago or so, I just used my Leica Q2 for photography solely. But about a year ago or so, I bought a Leica M11P along with a bunch of lenses, and while I absolutely love that camera, it has also brought choice paralysis back into my life. And I should have really known better and just brought the 28mm and the 50mm lens, which is what I use for 90% of the images that I shoot with the Leica M11P. And I should have just left the other lenses and accessories and stuff at home, which by the way is also true for the MacBook Air. Now, I love the MacBook Air, and had I traveled just by myself, I would have absolutely used it 100%, like in the evenings at the hotel to edit some photos and so on. But since I was traveling with family, I just spent the time with my family, and I only opened up the MacBook Air like once to look something up. And so there was really just no need for me to bring it, since we were only there for like not even 3 days. There was also no need to back up any images onto another hard drive or whatever. And so I should have just left those things at home, which would have made the backpack a lot easier to carry and also freed up some space, which I could have used for some more personal items. But not to worry, at least I didn't leave any critical items at home, and the little backpack was certainly still absolutely comfortable enough to carry, even despite all of the gear that I had in it. So overall, even though I might have sounded a bit negative on this video about this trip, I think overall this trip was a success and a proof of concept that these kinds of short getaways and little city trips can work out for us. And so I'm really looking forward to going on more trips of this type over the coming months of this year. But anyway, I hope this was somewhat interesting to you. If you want to follow along more closely with what I'm up to and what I'm doing, or just with the photos that I'm taking, check out my Instagram account. I'm trying to be a lot more active on there as well. And if you enjoy videos about photography, EDC, gear, bags and backpacks and all that good stuff, traveling, feel free to subscribe, and I will see you in another video next week. Until then, take care. Bye.